So sometimes you know what you know, and sometimes you know what you don't know, and sometimes, as the Firesign Theater says, everything you know is wrong.
You know that you're wrong, but you fear you're right. You suspect you're out of sync. You think that you're out of your mind. Everything you know is wrong.
If you think that modern medicines are developed and marketed when the medical industry sees a need for comprehensive treatments for diseases that are becoming more common in a population, then everything you know about the pharmaceutical industry and its influence in the marketplace is wrong. Analysts say that big pharma is often driven by supply-side markets that make them billions each year by putting the proverbial cart before the horse, meaning once they have the drugs in hand, they then create enough buzz around the diseases the drugs can supposedly cure to rake in the profits as we turn into a nation of pill-popping hypochondriacs. And all of this is happening while there's a shortage of viable drugs to treat real medical problems. So what are some of the most profitable diseases that Big Pharma hopes we'll all have, or at least think we have, in 2012? And what can be done to make pharmaceutical companies focus on developing and marketing drugs that are truly needed at an affordable price, rather than mass marketing the ones with the highest profit margins and ignoring both genetics and drugs for diseases that are less common or are more frequently seen in poorer communities? Joining me now to offer some insight on this issue is Martha Rosenberg, a health reporter and commentator who frequently writes about the impact of the pharmaceutical, food, and gun industries on public health, and whose work has appeared in several leading national publications, including Consumers Digest, the Boston Globe, and the San Francisco Chronicle. She's also the author of Born with a Junk Food Deficiency: How Flacks, Quacks, and Hacks Pimp the Public Health, which is slated to be released in 2012. Martha, welcome.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm happy to be with you.
So pleased to have you with us. What is supply-driven marketing, and how did the pharmaceutical industry get into it?
Well, it would be the opposite of demand-driven marketing, where people really needed the drug. Supply means we have the drug, and we need to find diseases and patients to justify it. And it's very much driven by direct-to-consumer advertising, which began, about 13 years ago, and that's what's propelled it.
How many other developed countries allow drug companies to advertise on TV, advertise directly to consumers? And you said it started 13 years ago. How did that come about? 'Cause I remember a time when it was illegal.
Well, it had never actually been illegal, but one thing that drove the direct-to-consumer advertising was the AIDS epidemic, and patients felt they wanted to know what their doctors knew about the drugs they were taking. So it kind of came from a good place, but obviously it went, where it is today. The only other country that actually allows direct-to-consumer advertising is New Zealand, but many, many countries have this sort of subliminal direct-to-consumer advertising, which is the ghostwritten journal articles and, of course, sites like WebMD. So there's a lot of advertising and marketing that doesn't really manifest as commercials.
Is WebMD a shill for the drug companies? I was under the impression it was just basically a website, funded by advertising.
Well, WebMD had, as one of its original partners, was Eli Lilly, according to the Washington Post. And you can see that they're a pharma, in my humble opinion, they're a pharma tool and front. But especially Eli Lilly has been instrumental in their messages in terms of their ads. The very idea of symptom checking, which is so big on WebMD, drives drugs, obviously.
Yeah. What the heck is a blockbuster disease?
Well, that would be a Wall Street term, like Lipitor was a blockbuster drug. But the diseases, as I described in this article that's up on the web now on Alternet, to be a really blockbuster disease, it has to be an actual disease that exists, but it can't have clear diagnostic tests so that people can self-hypnotize themselves into it and say, well, I ache in the joints, or I have, they can self-diagnose. And so a blockbuster disease, the best example I think is depression, because now it's kind of peaked, but for a while I think 20 million people in the U.S. were convinced by direct-to-consumer advertising that they had depression. There's no clear test for depression, and it's very much a self-diagnosed, phenomenon that made huge amounts of money.
So how do we fix this broken pharma system?
Well, that's probably direct-to-consumer advertising is the biggest culprit. I don't see that being withdrawn, but I think that if the clear numbers were shown to people of how their actual health premiums are raised and how our taxes, through the entitlement programs were raised from the hypochondria, I think that could make a big argument, because a lot of the top drugs, cost so much that, if somebody's on 3 or 4 or 5 of them, they might be spending $4,500 a month on drugs, but they're not paying that out of pocket, and that's inflating our healthcare costs. So I think that's one thing that could help us reel back the drug use. And the other thing, believe it or not, is how many of these drugs are actually in the drinking water.
Wow. Yeah, because they cycle through the body, or they get flushed down the toilet when they're not used or whatever, and they're not pulled out by water treatment plants. Is that what you're talking about?
Filtration, and just because of the sheer numbers that are on so many of the meds.
Right, right. How do other countries deal with this, especially since most of these companies are transnationals or even based overseas? We have just a minute left here, Martha.
Well, I'm not as much an expert on other countries as this nation. I think that what we need to do here is very much get the industry out of FDA, because right now FDA and the industry and Big Pharma are almost synonymous. And I do think conflicts of interest, if they were removed, would make a huge difference in the drugs that are approved. And once the danger with the direct-to-consumer advertising is a lot of the drugs should not have even been approved because they're dangerous. And one, of course, are the ADHD drugs that all the kids are on.
Right. Yeah, this is apparently a good example of that. Martha, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And a great article, great research you're doing.